The summer of 2001 had been unusually hot in Maineville, a small town where everyone knew everyone else. People waved to neighbors on their porches, kids rode bicycles on quiet streets, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. But for the Wallace family, that predictability had shattered one crisp May morning. Emma Wallace, 24, had left for her morning shift at the local diner like any other day. She was bright, cheerful, and full of plans, planning to enroll in night classes, dreaming of moving to a bigger city, and constantly sketching in her journal. No one could have guessed that the day she walked out of her small apartment, she would vanish without a trace. Her car was later found abandoned near the outskirts of town, doors unlocked, purse inside, as if she had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. Friends reported her missing almost immediately, but the initial investigation quickly stalled. There were no eyewitnesses, no security footage. This was 2001, long before surveillance cameras were commonplace in small towns, and no apparent motive. Detectives worked tirelessly, interviewing neighbors, coworkers, and friends. They scoured every possible lead, from suspicious strangers to potential disputes. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the case slowly grew cold. The town whispered theories. Maybe Emma had left town voluntarily, maybe she had been targeted by someone she knew. Her parents, George and Martha Wallace, refused to give up hope, holding vigils, distributing flyers, and pleading for any information that could lead to their daughter. Years passed. In 2004, detectives reopened the case after a minor lead surfaced. A local handyman remembered seeing a suspicious vehicle near Emma's apartment complex the morning she disappeared. The vehicle description was vague and nothing conclusive was found, but the reopening kept the memory alive. For the Wallaces, every year without answers was a torment, a gnawing reminder of the unknown. It wasn't until 2020, nearly 2 decades later, that the breakthrough came, not from witnesses, not from old reports, but from DNA. Advances in forensic science allowed investigators to test trace evidence found in Emma's abandoned car that had previously been inconclusive. Using new methods, they identified DNA belonging to a man long known to law enforcement, but never linked definitively to Emma's disappearance. The shockwaves were immediate. Authorities quietly obtained a warrant, and in early 2021, the suspect, Brian Callahan, a local man with a history of minor offenses, was arrested. He had maintained an unassuming presence in the community for years, working at local businesses and living a quiet life. To the townspeople, his arrest was both surreal and relieving. Finally, the mystery that had haunted their streets for 20 years had a face, a name, and an explanation. Callahan eventually confessed, detailing the events that led to Emma's abduction. Law enforcement officials described his account as chilling but thorough, leaving no doubt about his responsibility. The confession brought an end to a long period of uncertainty for Emma's family and the entire town, finally providing answers that had eluded them for so long. For George and Martha Wallace, the closure came with a complex mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but nothing could bring Emma back. The community, though relieved, mourned collectively, honoring her memory in vigils, scholarships, and local initiatives aimed at protecting young adults from similar fates. The Maineville case became a study in patience, persistence, and the evolution of forensic science. It reminded investigators nationwide that even the coldest of cases could be solved if evidence was preserved, technology advanced, and the relentless pursuit of truth continued. Emma Wallace's story, tragic yet resolved, became a symbol for families waiting for closure, showing that justice, though sometimes delayed, can eventually prevail. Even after Brian Callahan's arrest, the details of what had happened to Emma Wallace remained difficult for her family and the town to process. For years, the investigation had been constrained by the limitations of early 2000's forensic technology. Small towns like Maineville had modest police departments, limited resources, and only the most basic crime scene equipment. Evidence collected in 2001, Fibers from her clothing, a partial fingerprint on her car door, and traces of DNA under her fingernails had sat in storage, untouched, waiting for technology to catch up. Emma's friends remembered her vibrant spirit. Lucy, her best friend since high school, recalled their last conversation vividly. Emma had been planning a small art show in her apartment building lobby, eager to display her sketches and paintings. She was so excited, talking about how she wanted to show people her perspective, Lucy said. It's hard to believe that was the last time I spoke to her. For investigators, every new lead after 20 years was a mix of excitement and caution. When Callahan's DNA surfaced from evidence in 2020, they had to confirm everything before acting. Multiple laboratories tested and retested the samples. Experts cross-checked the results against national databases. Finally, a match emerged that couldn't be ignored. It connected him to microscopic fibers on Emma's clothing that had lain dormant in storage for decades. Detectives began reviewing old reports. They dug through call logs, witness statements, and crime scene photographs. Something subtle stood out. A witness had mentioned a white van parked near Emma's apartment on the morning she disappeared. The description matched Callahan's vehicle, though at the time, officers had dismissed it as coincidental. Now, with DNA confirming his presence, that detail became significant. Callahan's history was unassuming, almost invisible. He had lived in the same town for years, working construction jobs, helping neighbors with odd tasks, and never drawing suspicion. But small local accounts revealed patterns of behavior that, in hindsight, seemed disturbing. Women recalled feeling watched, their privacy invaded in ways that were never reported. It was subtle, but it hinted at the darkness that had existed behind his ordinary facade. The arrest brought relief but also reopened old wounds. For Emma's parents, George and Martha, the past 2 decades had been filled with anxiety, unanswered questions, and the unrelenting pain of not knowing what had happened to their daughter. Now, answers came, but they came with a mixture of grief and validation. Justice was achieved, but the years lost could never be returned. Community members began to speak publicly about the case for the first time in years. Candlelight vigils were held outside the diner where Emma had worked, drawing both old friends and young residents who had never met her but had heard her story through their parents. Local newspapers ran retrospective pieces, highlighting the advances in forensic science that had finally cracked the case. The narrative emphasized that patience, diligence, and evidence preservation could overcome even the most stubborn mysteries. As preparations for trial began in late 2021, prosecutors focused on building an airtight case. They relied on the DNA evidence, Callahan's eventual confession, and the historical record of his behavior in the community. Defense attorneys attempted to challenge the integrity of the decades-old evidence, but forensic experts testified that chain-of-custody protocols had been meticulously followed. Every sample, every fiber, and every trace had been carefully preserved, allowing modern science to extract the truth. Courtroom proceedings drew attention statewide. The small-town courthouse was filled beyond capacity, with reporters from regional outlets covering every moment. For Emma's family, attending each session was emotionally exhausting. They listened as the timeline of events was reconstructed, step by step, revealing the sequence of her abduction, the subsequent concealment of her body, and Callahan's attempts to evade detection. During the trial, prosecutors highlighted the human side of the story. They presented Emma not just as a victim, but as a woman with dreams, passions, and a life interrupted too soon. Her sketches and paintings were displayed in court, offering a window into the person she had been. Witnesses described her laughter, her empathy, and her quiet determination. These personal details were vital in reminding the jury that beyond the DNA and the forensic analysis, there had been a life taken, a life that deserved justice. Callahan's confession was perhaps the most impactful moment of the trial. Speaking in a calm, almost detached voice, he admitted to abducting Emma and described the events that led to her death. Prosecutors carefully guided his testimony, corroborating his account with evidence recovered from the crime scene and the preserved items in storage. The combination of confession and forensic proof left little room for doubt. Outside the courthouse, the town of Maineville held its collective breath. Residents who had been children at the time of Emma's disappearance now found themselves revisiting memories of that summer in 2001. Community members shared stories of hope, grief, and the lingering uncertainty that had pervaded their lives for years. The trial, while painful, also became a moment of healing, an acknowledgement that, though delayed, justice could arrive even after decades. By the spring of 2022, the trial concluded. The jury deliberated for 4 days, weighing the evidence presented and the human testimony they had heard. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the courtroom erupted in a mixture of relief and emotion. George and Martha Wallace embraced, tears streaming down their faces, as neighbors and friends applauded quietly, knowing that the nightmare had finally come to an end. The aftermath of the case had broader implications beyond Maineville. Local law enforcement began implementing new evidence preservation protocols, inspired by the success of re-examining decades-old cases. Regional police departments shared the story of Emma Wallace with other communities, emphasizing the importance of storing evidence properly and maintaining detailed records, even when cases go cold. For Emma's family, the focus gradually shifted toward honoring her memory. In 2023, a scholarship fund was established in her name for young artists pursuing their dreams, particularly those in small towns with limited opportunities. The initiative sought to ensure that Emma's passion for creativity and expression could continue to inspire others, transforming tragedy into hope. The Maine 2001 cold case served as a reminder that even when years pass, justice can be achieved. It highlighted the importance of modern forensic tools, the dedication of investigators willing to revisit old cases, and the resilience of families who refuse to give up. Emma Wallace's story, while tragic, became a symbol of perseverance, illustrating that the truth, no matter how long it takes, can eventually emerge from the shadows. Even as the courtroom emptied after the verdict, the ripples of the trial extended far beyond its walls. Maineville had spent 2 decades under the shadow of Emma Wallace's disappearance, and now, with Brian Callahan convicted, the town began to reckon with what had been hidden in plain sight all along. Old wounds reopened, yet there was also a cautious sense of closure. People who had lived with fear and uncertainty for so long could finally begin to reclaim parts of their lives. Investigators reflected on how technology had turned the tide. The DNA evidence, preserved meticulously in 2001, had been analyzed using tools unavailable at the time of Emma's disappearance. The forensic laboratory had applied advanced mitochondrial DNA testing and genetic genealogy techniques, narrowing the pool of potential suspects. It was a breakthrough that underscored the importance of never discarding evidence, no matter how old the case. Detective Rachel Monroe, who had joined the Maineville Police Department in 2010, described the moment the match came back as surreal. "We'd always hoped, always believed we could solve this," she said. "But seeing the DNA match finally confirm our suspicions, it was overwhelming." Even with the arrest, memories of that summer in 2001 remained vivid. Residents recalled the tension, the whispers, and the unanswered questions that haunted daily life. Emma's parents had never stopped searching for answers. George Wallace, now in his late 50s, admitted that the years of uncertainty had been physically and emotionally exhausting. Martha Wallace, reflecting on the decades-long ordeal, described the conviction as a bittersweet relief. "We finally have answers, but it's not the same as having her back," she said. "Nothing can fill the emptiness, but at least we know the truth." In the weeks following the trial, Maineville became a town transformed by its own history. Local schools invited law enforcement officers to discuss the case, emphasizing the role of persistence, proper evidence handling, and forensic science in solving crimes. Community forums were held where families shared stories about how unresolved disappearances affect lives for years. Emma's story became an example not only of tragedy but also of hope, demonstrating that even after decades, justice can prevail. Meanwhile, investigators turned their attention to reviewing other cold cases in the region. The success in Emma Wallace's case prompted renewed energy in examining files that had long been forgotten. Detectives discovered that several small details in other cases, previously dismissed, could now be revisited using modern techniques. The Maine 2001 case became a blueprint for reopening cold files, systematic, meticulous, and patient. Psychologists and victim advocates also noted the impact of the case on the Wallace family and the community. The trauma of long-term uncertainty often leads to lingering anxiety, depression, and a pervasive sense of insecurity. But the resolution, as painful as it was, allowed for a shift toward healing. Community members were encouraged to speak about their experiences, confront lingering fears, and engage in collective remembrance. A memorial was established in the town park, where residents could light candles in Emma's memory, reflecting both sorrow and resilience. The trial also shed light on subtle signs of predatory behavior that had been overlooked. Callahan had presented a facade of normalcy, blending into the fabric of the small town. Yet patterns of suspicious conduct, innocuous at first glance, revealed the importance of vigilance and reporting even minor concerns. Law enforcement agencies used the case as a training example, demonstrating that early intervention and attention to small details could prevent future tragedies. Emma's legacy extended beyond justice. Her artwork, once forgotten in a drawer, became a symbol of her voice and vision. Local galleries organized exhibitions featuring her sketches and paintings, not as evidence but as a tribute. Children and young adults in Maineville, inspired by her creativity, began exploring their own artistic pursuits. Scholarships and community art programs ensured that Emma's influence persisted, transforming the pain of loss into opportunities for growth and expression. Brian Callahan's conviction also prompted introspection within the Maineville Police Department. Officers revisited protocols for handling cold cases, emphasizing continuous training, collaboration with forensic specialists, and the integration of evolving technologies. Detective Monroe noted that the department had learned a valuable lesson. Persistence and adaptability are as essential as any piece of evidence. Even with closure, questions lingered. How had Callahan managed to live undetected for so long? How could such darkness exist behind a seemingly ordinary life? Residents grappled with these uncomfortable truths, acknowledging that evil often hides in plain sight. Yet, the conviction also reinforced the belief that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually surface. For the Wallace family, life began to find a new rhythm. They attended community events, participated in memorial activities, and engaged in efforts to educate others about safety and advocacy. While grief remained a constant companion, the clarity provided by justice allowed them to channel their energy into positive change. Their story became a testament to resilience, illustrating that even decades of uncertainty cannot erase the human drive for answers. In reflecting on the Maine 2001 case, law enforcement, families, and the community agreed on one point: justice delayed is still justice. The combination of meticulous evidence preservation, modern forensic science, and unwavering dedication had finally resolved a mystery that had haunted a town for 20 years. The story of Emma Wallace became a beacon for other unresolved cases, a reminder that persistence, patience, and hope can illuminate even the darkest paths. By late 2022, Maineville had largely moved on, yet Emma's memory remained woven into the town's identity. Annual vigils, art exhibitions, and educational programs ensured that her presence endured. The case reinforced the power of community, the importance of never abandoning a search for truth, and the undeniable impact one life can have, Even long after it, the weeks after Brian Callahan's conviction carried a strange mixture of relief and emptiness for Maineville. Streets that had once felt heavy with suspicion now seemed lighter, yet the shadows of past uncertainty lingered. For the Wallace family, the days were a blend of quiet reflection and deliberate action as they tried to channel grief into purpose. George and Martha Wallace began working with local advocacy groups, meeting with families of missing persons, and sharing their experience. They spoke openly about the emotional toll of waiting nearly 2 decades for answers, and stressed the importance of preserving evidence, maintaining hope, and pushing investigators to keep cases alive. Emma's story became a central teaching point for both law enforcement and educational programs. Local schools integrated aspects of her case into civics lessons, focusing on community vigilance, safety awareness, and the evolving role of forensic science. Students learned how persistence, careful documentation, and attention to small details could change the course of investigations. Detective Rachel Monroe participated in workshops explaining the modern techniques that solved the case: DNA testing from decades-old samples, genetic genealogy, and the importance of cross-referencing public databases. Her message was clear: no detail is too small, no case too old to solve. In the Maineville Police Department, protocols shifted. Cold cases were no longer placed on indefinite hold. Every unsolved file was re-examined periodically, and officers were trained in emerging forensic technologies. The Wallace case became a model for handling long-dormant investigations, preserving evidence meticulously, updating records, and maintaining open communication with families. Even simple items such as a hair sample, a torn piece of fabric, or fingerprints could hold the key years later. The department emphasized that patience, combined with scientific advancements, could bring long-awaited closure. Emma's personal belongings, once packed away in boxes, were returned to her family after the trial. Each item carried memories and emotions that words could scarcely convey. Her sketchbooks revealed a talent and vision that had been hidden from the world. Friends and neighbors helped organize a permanent exhibition at the Maineville Community Center, displaying Emma's drawings alongside photographs she had taken. The exhibit drew visitors from across the state, many moved not only by her art but by the story of her perseverance and the resolve of her family to seek justice. The media coverage of the case sparked broader conversations about cold cases nationwide. National outlets highlighted how evidence preservation and new DNA technologies had cracked a mystery that had seemed unsolvable. Experts emphasized that cases like Emma's proved the critical importance of maintaining proper storage and documentation, even when leads appear to dry up. The story became a touchstone for discussions on law enforcement policy, forensic ethics, and the delicate balance between science and persistence in criminal investigations. For the Wallace family, the trial and conviction were not the end but a beginning. They launched the Emma Wallace Memorial Foundation, dedicated to providing support for families of missing persons and funding scholarships for students pursuing criminal justice or forensic science careers. The foundation also hosted annual community events, combining awareness campaigns with celebrations of resilience. Emma's name became synonymous not only with tragedy but with positive change, a symbol of hope emerging from years of darkness. Therapists and counselors in Maineville noted the long-term impact on the community. Residents who had experienced anxiety and fear during the years of uncertainty gradually began to regain trust. Public discussions, memorials, and art exhibits created spaces for shared healing. Children who had grown up hearing about Emma's disappearance learned about perseverance, advocacy, and the value of standing up for justice, even when the path seemed impossible. Law enforcement's success in solving the Wallace case also inspired renewed efforts to examine other unsolved homicides from the early 2000s. Investigators revisited old files with a sense of urgency and optimism, applying lessons learned from the Maine 2001 case. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small or degraded, was now seen as potentially critical. Detective Monroe emphasized to her colleagues, "This case proves that even the oldest evidence, stored correctly and analyzed with modern tools, can speak. It reminds us that no one should be forgotten." Meanwhile, Maineville itself began to change. The town invested in public safety initiatives and community outreach, strengthening relationships between residents and local law enforcement. Neighborhood watch programs were revitalized, and community centers hosted seminars on personal safety and crime awareness. The case had left scars, but it also instilled a renewed sense of responsibility and vigilance. Emma's story reached beyond Maineville. In forensic science journals, her case was cited as an example of successful cold case resolution through genetic genealogy. Conferences on missing persons and law enforcement strategy used the Wallace case as a teaching model. Students and professionals examined the timeline of evidence collection, storage, and eventual testing to better understand how patience and scientific innovation intersect in criminal investigations. The ripple effect of one case extended far beyond a single town, influencing practices nationwide. The emotional resonance of the case remained profound. Judith Wallace, Emma's younger cousin and a local teacher, reflected on the impact the trial had on her students. "They saw a story that began with loss and ended with justice," she said. "They learned that even when life seems unfair and cruel, determination and the careful pursuit of truth can make a difference." Emma's story gave them hope. Yet even with the conviction, questions remained for many in Maineville. How had someone like Brian Callahan been able to conceal his crimes for so long? How could a community, close-knit and vigilant, not see the warning signs? These uncomfortable truths prompted self-reflection, both for residents and law enforcement, highlighting the complexity of human behavior and the importance of maintaining both vigilance and compassion. The final pieces of Emma's legacy were slowly put into place. Public memorials, scholarship programs, educational initiatives, and exhibitions ensured that her story would not fade. Her parents, friends, and the broader community understood that while nothing could bring Emma back, her life and her story could continue to create meaningful change. Her name became a reminder that the persistence of human will, combined with technological progress, can illuminate the darkest of mysteries. As the town settled into a new rhythm, the Wallace family, law enforcement, and community members carried forward a shared understanding that justice, while sometimes delayed, is never truly impossible. Emma's story, once a haunting mystery, had transformed into a powerful narrative of resilience, hope, and the enduring importance of truth. And in Maineville, her memory lived on, not only in the hearts of those who loved her but in the broader legacy of a town and a system awakened to the possibility of change. The trial had ended, the verdict delivered, and Brian Callahan was behind bars, yet the echoes of Emma Wallace's story continued to reverberate through Maineville. While justice had been served in the courtroom, the process of healing, both for her family and the broader community, was only beginning. For George and Martha Wallace, each day brought a mixture of grief, relief, and cautious optimism. They were no longer trapped in a limbo of unanswered questions. They could finally honor Emma's memory openly and constructively. The Wallace family's activism deepened in the months following the conviction. Their foundation, now firmly established, began funding cold case initiatives across the state, emphasizing the critical importance of maintaining evidence and leveraging modern forensic methods. Police departments in surrounding towns consulted the Wallaces and Detective Rachel Monroe, eager to understand